Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
People kind enough to have listened to this programme for a number of years may remember my little chickens. Do you remember my little chickens? I had 2 little chickens until a fox got them. And I'm very dismayed to learn today that people are abandoning their pet chickens. And I wonder if you can think of what the main reason is for chicken owners dumping their pets. I shall share that with you later in the programme. There is also, and I do have to sort of steel myself before bringing these stories back to your attention, but for reasons I'm not sure now that I will ever understand, tales of paedophilia committed by men in positions of trust and power and covered up for years by august and supposedly respectable institutions do not gather the media attention that I believe they should. So I shall be steering you a little later in the programme to the latest publication from the Child Sex Abuse Inquiries section on the English Benedictine congregation. Grim reading. But those of us who do not learn from history are condemned forever to repeat it. Now, 7 minutes after 10 is the time. Do you remember this?
I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
Now, he knew when he said that it was impossible to guarantee, but he figured you were stupid enough to fall for it. I know that you didn't, but possibly you're sitting next to someone at the moment who did, or you're working alongside someone, or you're in the car with someone who did. He knew he couldn't guarantee that. The gamble, as always, with anything Brexit related, was how much of the public will be stupid enough to believe the thing I'm telling them that I know isn't true. He could not guarantee it. It was one of those really curious moments in British politics where Jeremy Hunt, a politician who, I mean, in normal circumstances would represent the triumph of mediocrity over merit, but astonishingly, given the paucity of competition, during that Conservative leadership campaign, Jeremy Hunt became hostage to reality. It was an incredible moment. I don't know if you remember the hustings where Rory Stewart had it all to play for. I know that Rory Stewart feels, I think it was the ITV hustings, wasn't it? The one where they were all sitting on stools and he took his tie off halfway through. I know he feels that if he played a blinder that night, everything could have been different. And when you're talking about a Conservative leadership campaign which delivers Downing Street to the victor, then when I say everything could have been different, I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that the whole history of these islands could have been completely different. But there's a crucial moment in the sort of political toing and froing where Jeremy Hunt clearly decided that he couldn't swallow it. Rory Stewart couldn't. Jeremy Hunt, if he had said the same thing as Boris Johnson, would it have enhanced his leadership credentials? But he couldn't bring himself to say something that he knew was not true. Yeah? Boris Johnson, of course, has a long career of consciously saying things that aren't true in the hope that the people he's talking to will be dumb enough or credulous enough or desperate enough either to pretend that they don't disbelieve him or indeed to fall for him in the first place. And that leads us, I think, inevitably to now. I'll play that clip again because obviously what they want you to talk about today is the election, not about the fact that can you remember a time that a British Prime Minister broke a promise, broke a pledge so completely, so quickly?
I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
Well, I don't know how you process that, actually. Ifs and buts, you blame it on someone else, don't you? You blame it on the moonlight. You blame it on the sunshine. You blame it on the good times. You blame it on the bad times. You blame it on the boogie. You blame it on anyone except the bloke who actually said it, because there's no earthly way when he said it that he could have believed it. It was a possibility if he could somehow avoid parliamentary scrutiny, which he tried to do by shutting Parliament down. That, of course, proved to be unlawful and involved misleading the Queen. So then they tried to sort of rush it all through in 3 days. Do you remember when they said they needed the Queen's speech in order to press on with a programme of really important legislation? Again, gambling that people would be dumb enough to believe that this Conservative government, which essentially is the successor to administrations which presided over tens of thousands of cuts to our public services, have apparently developed a conscience and now really, really want to help put people back into the public services. We're going to see an election fought when it eventually comes around, with the Conservatives trying to persuade you that replacing some of the jobs they cut between 2010 and 2018 constitutes a reason to vote for them. It's a bit like coming around, smashing your windows, and then campaigning on reglazing your front of your house for you. Well, what are you going to do? We're going to fix your windows, but you broke them. Yeah, don't mention that. Don't bash the bankers. We had to break your windows because something about Labour and that note that got left behind about there being no money left. We had to break your windows, had to cut your police service, had to cut your health service, had to pay for his teachers, firefighters, nurses, doctors, had to alienate junior doctors, had to alienate the emergencies. We had to do all of those things because Labour are very bad. I can't remember the reason they gave. Alexei Sayle put it best. Austerity was an ideology built upon the idea that the international banking crisis of 2008 was caused by there being too many libraries in Wolverhampton. So here we are. If he wants an election, it is, of course, Jeremy Corbyn's gift. If he wants a delay, which he swore he wouldn't request but did, I think what's the line that the Lemmings are supposed to have swallowed on this one? He didn't ask for a delay, Parliament did, or something like that. It's just not true. But of course, Boris Johnson has proven for decades that saying things that aren't true can be, at least in the short term, beneficial. So you've got Corbyn in charge of whether or not there's an election, the European Commission in charge of how long this delay will be. Astonishingly, the Queen's speech, which he insisted needed the prorogation of Parliament to promote and accelerate, actually passed yesterday. So, do you know, I think I'm going to do it this way round today. I know we're supposed to be talking about the election, but you'll forgive me for not picking up that dead cat that Dominic Cummings has tossed onto the public table. It's 13 minutes after 10. How long has he been Prime Minister now? It's about 100 days, is it, give or take? Has Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister, said anything that turned out to be true? 0345 6060 973. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I'll leave you with another little example. You remember this, of course.
Can you make a promise today to the British public that you will not go back to Brussels and ask for another delay to Brexit?
Yes.
And, sorry.
I can.
And would you
I'd rather be dead in a ditch.
Well, I mean, there's no shortage of ditches, although I appreciate it was a figure of speech. Metaphorical ditches are 10 a penny too. So I think this works, doesn't it? If I don't have any calls by the time we come back from the break, then we'll find another way into this conversation. I should probably order up something on the side. Has Boris Johnson, since becoming Prime Minister, said anything that has turned out to be true? Actually, no, that's not fair. Let's start from the beginning of the Conservative leadership campaigns. Has he said, can you remember, there must be stuff. Off the top of my head, I can't quite find it. But has he said anything that turned out to be true? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I do feel the need to serve up at least a small side order in case that none of us can think of anything that the Prime Minister has said since becoming Prime Minister that turned out to be true. This sort of attempt to trap Jeremy Corbyn in some sort of electoral vice. Why should Jeremy Corbyn go for an election? He didn't make this mess. Boris Johnson did. An election is seen as an escape route, a way out of the mess that Boris Johnson promised would be the opposite of a mess. So should Jeremy... I mean, how does that work? And does it even matter as a question? Because is your answer to that question going to depend upon whether or not you've swallowed the Boris Johnson snake oil, the Jeremy Corbyn snake oil, or no snake oil at all? The number you need is 0345 6060 973, and it's Friday. I can't wait to talk to you. We've got 95, we think, days. It's a shame. If it was 100 days, it would have a lovely ring to it. In fact, we'd probably come back and do it on the 100th day, unless, of course, he said something that turns out to be true in the intervening 4 or 5 days. So it sounds a little bit silly, but my goodness me, it's deadly serious. We've got a Prime Minister, we've got a record-breaking audience, got a state-of-the-art switchboard. It's a bit like that scene in the Blues Brothers. You know, well, how does it go? We've got half a pack of cigarettes, something, 200 miles to Chicago, hit it. So we're all good to go. Between us, we should be able to find lots of things that Boris Johnson has said that are true. But I'll be happy with one. 0345 6060 973. Since the leadership campaign began, has anything Boris Johnson said turned out to be true? And, you know, I have underpinning that question all the time. I have this simple objection. Or simple confusion about why are you still putting up with it? I mean, how many times does he have to be wrong? Mark is in Hitchin. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say to you, James, good morning,
Hello.
hello. Right, the first thing is, as somebody who likes to watch politics, cannot find anything he said that is true. But what I'm more concerned about is the massive mousetrap he set on Monday that nobody's taking any notice of.
Go on.
Right, so the order paper has now been published for Monday, and Boris is actually raising the request for an election under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, and the wording he has used is the wording that needs to be used if you want a 2/3 majority vote. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, that's the Fixed Term Parliament Act requirement.
Right, okay. So, I noticed on my...
This is supposed to be fun, you know, this bit of the programme where we're all desperately trying to find... I'm not criticising you, I'm just reminding you, Mark.
Okay, well, here's the bit that's fun then, because Boris has thrown up so much rubbish, he's smoke-screened what he can do. If he gets the vote on Monday, he can, under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, immediately dissolve Parliament, and then we would have an election 25 working days later, which would mean, and here's the fun bit for you then, James...
December the 12th.
It doesn't matter about the December the 12th. What it means is that Parliament will not be sitting on the 31st of October or anywhere close. We'll have a no-deal Brexit.
Hang on. Under what needs to happen for him to dissolve Parliament?
Right, okay.
Because you know what I'm thinking, don't you? And I don't want to fall out, but it strikes me as unlikely that you would be the only person in the country to have spotted this.
Well, there you go, and I'm sure I'm not. But basically, the Fixed Term Parliament Act says that once Parliament has decided by 2/3 to have an election, the date of the election is under the gift of the Prime Minister. Yes, but
they're not going to decide to have an election. Well, he's not going to get a 2/3 majority, and if he does, everything you've said is quite well known already.
Well, you say he's not. At the moment, on my social media feed, saying people like the SNP are looking to back the election.
If he gets... double check that. If he gets a 2/3 majority in the House of Commons, of course he gets to decide when the election is.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think what he's hoping that one of the outcomes possibly might be that people are stupid enough because they feel the political pressure on them that the Conservatives have now asked so many times for an election, they can't give an excuse. Well, the excuse is if they say yes on Monday, he can dissolve on Tuesday, we exit the EU on the 31st because there'll be nobody there to stop it or to legislate.
I kind of see what you mean. I think you're worrying unduly, but I will happily eat a small slice of humble pie if you turn out to be bang on the money, as long as I can have a side order of delicious clotted cream. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Glenn's had a go. He says, "Dear James, I think Boris once said that his name was Boris Johnson. I think that was true." Well, technically not, of course. His given name was Alexander, but at a young age he decided that Boris would be a sort of more winning nomenclature. 23 minutes after 10. Costas is in Cheshire. Costas, what would you like to say? Costas? No? OK, we'll give him another go in a minute. Dave's in South Ockenden. Dave, what would you like to say?
Yeah, of course he's told the truth, James.
Go on, Dave.
Right, OK, he didn't ask for the extension.
Oh, OK, who did then?
All he done was photocopied and everything. Corbyn and that wanted it. He didn't want it, hence why he didn't sign it. he had to send it off, but it wasn't him that asked for
You mean
it.
this letter here? I'll just read you the last paragraph. I am writing, therefore, to inform the European Council that the United Kingdom is seeking a further extension to the period provided under Article 50, brackets, 3 brackets of the Treaty of the... yada, yada, yada. Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So tell us again who didn't send that letter?
No. Didn't sign it.
No, who didn't send
sign
it?
it at
Because
all.
yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So who do you think sent it?
Well, it was only thought about by the electric thing and all the others.
It's a terrible line, Dave, which probably stroke of luck on your part, but I'll ask you again. Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Who do you think that letter's from?
I understand what you're saying, James.
Well, then
I
answer
fully
the question,
understand.
Dave.
No, well, all I'm saying to you is it's not him that has actually asked for the extension.
We're going to go round in circles here. You said he didn't send the letter. Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Come on, Dave. Who do you think sent that letter?
I know what you're saying, but it's not signed. It's
Yours
false.
sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of
Yeah.
Great Britain
Well,
and Northern Ireland. You don't have to...
I can write that. I can write something and send it to you.
And you'd be arrested for impersonating the Prime Minister. So who do you think sent that letter?
Probably one of his menials.
Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Dave, just pause. Have a little think about how they've managed to do this to you. Here you are on national radio claiming that a letter signed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Not signed, James. You said signed.
No, a
Not
signed
James.
Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Not signed.
Oh, Dave, mate, come on.
See? And the thing
Okay,
is,
all right, come,
you know,
let's have
can
another
I say
go.
one other thing?
No,
Can I
of course
say
you
one other
can't. Not until you answer the question. This letter in
I
front
need
of
to
me,
ask you.
this letter in front of me that's from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Who sent it? Who's it from?
It's from whoever the Prime Minister was at
Dave,
the time.
well, there you go. So why are you laughing, Dave?
Because what makes
you've just
me
been
laugh,
made to
Dave?
look like a complete mug by Boris Johnson, and you're
not at all.
laughing.
No, not at all. I'll tell you what, though.
Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And I'll tell you what happened in Downing Street. They said, let's not sign it. And someone said, don't be daft. No one would be dumb enough to fall for that. And Dominic Cummings said, just you watch. And here's Dave in South Ockenden.
And there's 17.4 million like me, exactly. And the thing
That's an
is,
appalling slur, mate. They're not all, there's no way they're all as stupid as you're sounding this morning.
The thing is, James...
The thing is, Dave, until you tell me who sent this letter that is signed Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland...
Please don't say signed, James, because it's not signed.
All right. So they sat there in Downing Street and they said, so we won't sign it. And somebody clever said, there's no earthly way they're going to fall for that. It is the most pathetic, childish, responsibility-evading act of cowardice that any of us can remember. You honestly think that British people... And do you know what they said, Dave? They said, not only will people fall for it, boss, but you'll get some... characters ringing up radio stations claiming that 17.4 million people are in favour of it. And here you are.
Oh, I am, mate. I'm representing them all.
You are, I know.
I'm representing them all.
Yeah.
Can you answer me one question?
No, mate, because you haven't answered mine. Tell me who sent that letter.
Go on, yeah. Go on, who sent that out?
Who sent that letter? The one here.
The Prime Minister.
Yours sincerely, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Who do you think it's from? Take a wild guess.
It's the same thing as everyone else has done.
Dave. Look what they've done to you, mate. Look what they've done to you. I know, we won't sign it, right? And we'll get the Sunday Times to tell everyone it's a cheap old photocopy, and then they won't notice the fact that Boris Johnson has completely failed to keep the pledge that he made countless times. 10:27 is the time. Let's give Costas another go in Cheshire. Costas, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, there's only one thing that comes to mind that he's done that he said he was going to do, was get a deal. And I think that's come to true, but that's about it.
Yeah, I'll give you that. I mean, the idea, the bit I don't like is this idea that people said he couldn't do it. People said they would never reopen the deal, whereas the only reason why the received wisdom was that he wouldn't be able to changed the terms of the deal was because he'd sworn blind that no British Prime Minister would ever countenance the introduction of a customs border into the Irish Sea. So I suppose he's come back with a deal. It's worse than the deal that we already had, but it counts, doesn't it?
It counts, but everything else around the deal is wrong. But that's the only thing.
I shall give you that. You're a very generous man, Costas. You're a very generous man.
I'm trying to be.
No,
that's about all I can give him.
No, I'll give you that. I mean, it doesn't matter what the deal is. Don't look under the bonnet. But we can all agree. Here is a shiny car.
Well, what can I say, James? Nice talking to you.
Nice talking to you, Costas. Καλό ταξίδι. Ryan is in Leicester. Ryan, what's he said that's come true?
It's not about what he said, it's about what politicians have ever said that's true.
No, I'm terribly sorry, mate. I'm presenting this programme, and the question is, what has Boris said since becoming Prime Minister that has turned out to be true?
Everything he said with everything with the NHS and everything else with the police, it's all in motion. It's all over talking about his Brexit.
You can keep your emotions to yourself, my friend. What's he said that's come true?
Well, it's not about what he said. I'm saying
But that's the question. That's the question you've rung in to answer, though.
Yeah, no.
So what's he said that's come true? Well, okay, let's just keep a promise then. What promises has he kept?
He will keep his promise to leaving Brexit. It might not be October the 31st.
Well, hang on. Did you miss the bit where he focused very, very clearly on October the 31st?
Yeah, well then...
Because even if he gets out, he's already broken this promise, hasn't he?
I want everybody to know there are no circumstances in which I will ask Brussels to delay. We're leaving on the 31st of October, no ifs or buts.
So you see, Ryan, if we leave on the 2nd of November, he's still broken that promise. So I'll give you one more chance, because I'm late for the news. A promise Boris Johnson made while seeking to become leader of the Conservative Party or Prime Minister, or anything that he's done since becoming Prime Minister that has turned out to be true. Over to Ryan.
He will get Brexit done.
Oh, mate. Do you want to buy a bridge?
No, what, a bridge?
Yeah, I've got a bridge for sale.
Right.
It's really lovely. It opens up in the middle, so that ships can go through it.
No, I don't need a bridge.
Are you sure? Well, give me 5 minutes. I reckon. Give me 5 minutes. I reckon I could sell it to you. He would categorically not request a delay from the European Union. He would categorically take us out, whatever that means, by October the 31st. He didn't want an election. He needed to prorogue Parliament in order to have a Queen's speech, because he's desperate to get on with a really important programme of legislation not linked to Brexit. But the Queen's speech passed yesterday, and now he's threatening to go on strike. I mean, I'm having a little bit of fun with the question of what he's said since since throwing his hat into the leadership battle that has turned out to be true. Costas points out that he said he'd get a deal of sorts, and he has, one that involves breaking his promise never to put a customs border in the Irish Sea. So we can let him have that. I mean, it's an odd one, because he's kept a promise and broken a promise at the same time. So by securing a rejigged withdrawal agreement, you could argue that he'd kept a promise, but of course it involves riding a coach and horses through the promise he made severally, both to the DUP and to the Conservative Party, that he would not countenance any form of customs border in the Irish Sea. So I'm going to give Costas the benefit of the doubt on that one, but I think we both knew, him and me, that it was something of a Pyrrhic victory. And now we're contemplating this curious development this week, where he said he needed a Queen's speech in order to get a legislative programme in front of Parliament, and by hook or by crook, he got it. And it passed yesterday. It's only the second or third thing he's managed to get through Parliament. So now that he's got the Queen's speech passed, that really, really important Queen's speech, which was the reason why he had to suspend Parliament, albeit it turned out to be unlawful, he then managed to do it lawfully, and he got the Queen's speech up and running, and he managed to get it passed. Why is he now threatening to go on strike? 0345 6060973. And I try and do it in a light-hearted way. I appreciate it's incredibly depressing to hear people who almost queue up to celebrate being lied to and misled. But I am interested in how serious this is. A suggestion, a suspicion in some quite important corners that actually there is now a deliberate, almost Trumpian programme underway to discredit everything. Because, of course, if you're arguing black and white, then the truth doesn't matter anymore. So if you want an election and you don't want an election, if you need to get the Queen's speech through Parliament, but you also threaten to go on strike when you have got the Queen's speech through Parliament. If you swear blind, you'll be out on October the 31st, but then carry on as normal when you're not out on October the 31st. Do you see what I mean? I'm probably exaggerating, but you see what I mean? About the way in which the White House completely subverted objective truth. Is that possibly what's happening at Downing Street now? That and the dead cats, of course, because today we're supposed to be talking not about the fact that in just 6 days' time, Boris Johnson's career-defining promise will be broken. We won't be talking about that. We'll be somehow talking about Jeremy Corbyn. Here we go. The front of the Times. Labour in chaos over election bid by Johnson. Not Johnson in chaos over imminent breaking of promise that got him into Downing Street in the first place. Thank you very much, Mr. Murdoch. Simon is in Kentish Town. Simon, what would you like to say?
You don't get it, James. I can promise you, the more you go banging on, belly aching about Boris Johnson, the bigger his majority is going to be at the election.
Possibly overestimate my importance, but talk to me more about detail rather than fetishes.
Well, you're a recruiting sergeant for Boris Johnson.
No, you're still doing the fetish. Talk to me about
detail. The pronunciation of Farage's name correct. It's
Simon,
not Farage, it's Farage.
I think you'll find he said it's either.
Correct if you can't even get that correct.
He said it's either, Simon.
Get on the train, James. Get on the train.
Simon, you're on the radio. Did someone tell you that?
Yeah, get on the train.
You're on the radio. Tell me the thing Boris Johnson has done that's come true.
Well, if you can't even get the pronunciation of Farage right, how can you get anything else right?
Something he's done that's come true.
Get on the train, James.
Oh, mate, this is British democracy. You see, I say to you, how serious is it? And there you have Simon. Far be it from me to pick anybody up on how they pronounce things. But there it is. That's all these people have got left. And yet they'll still ring a radio station and then presumably sort of slink away, convinced that they've made some pertinent point. And I can assure you that my colleagues Aaron and Ava tirelessly pursue people with salient points to make. And the only ones who end up on air are the ones who have lied to them to get through. No salient point at all. This is Boris Johnson's Britain. Enjoy it. Mark is in Worthing. Mark, what do you reckon?
I've got one, James. Right.
Come on, then.
So, he did say that he would remove the whip from anyone who voted against him in the Benn Act. And he did it.
Yeah, I think that counts.
The audacity to vote against the government, which he obviously did before.
Yes.
But,
he did it on the withdrawal agreement, not just on the attendant legislation.
Exactly. Yeah,
did he say it, or did he just do it afterwards?
No, he did say before.
Did he say it in advance? I don't know. I'm giving it to you anyway because we're desperate to put something in the debit column.
Well, I thought,
But I'm not 100% sure that he said he would do it before he did it.
I'm pretty sure it was a threat that came from the whip's office.
And 2021, you'll lose the whip if you don't do what the government wants, said a Prime Minister who made, essentially staked his entire career on voting against the government during the Theresa May's withdrawal agreements.
I can't quite believe we're all sort of still going along with it. Looking at, going through a Queen's speech that's never going to be implemented and talking about a general election, and the reason Labour won't vote for it is because they're too scared and actually not. But
you heard where it leads. You heard the last caller. Once you start doing the detail, that's what happens to these poor souls, and they are our neighbours and our friends and our colleagues. And we, however angry and bitter and infuriated by their own credulity and gullibility they've become, we have to create a warm and welcoming space for them, even if it's going to take years for the penny to drop. Because you look at the British political landscape and you have people who are being offered a choice between admitting they've been lied to or swallowing more lies. And our friend Simon, well, he's still swallowing.
Get on the train.
Get on the train, Mark. Get on the train. Henry's in Epsom. Henry, what would you like to say?
Morning.
Hello, Henry.
I find it a slightly upsetting that you call him a liar when actually he was forced by Parliament, by breaking the law, would have been to get us out on the 31st.
Do you think that took him by surprise?
Well, it's irrespective. He made a promise which you were saying is a liar, but ultimately, it's like I'll sell your car in 3 weeks, and in 2 weeks the law changes to forbid me from selling you that car.
No. The law hasn't really changed.
Well, the law forced him. He was forced by an act of Parliament, which was a law, to request an extension.
But the other bit about leaving or dying in a ditch on the 31st of October,
Well, then he should go and kill himself. But frankly...
Well, Henry, watch your language, mate. None of us need to...
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to rude.
That's all right. But just to help you, because you said you were upset, and I hate to think of you being upset. You're not suggesting for a minute that when Boris Johnson pledged... I mean, just off the top of my head, never to put a customs border in the Irish Sea, that he didn't understand what he was talking about, or that when he pledged that he definitely wouldn't ask the European Union for a delay, he didn't understand how Parliament could work. Because either you're suggesting he's incredibly incompetent or incredibly corrupt, so I don't understand what you're upset about.
Well, the fact that he makes commitment, as we all do in daily life, including to the population in this case, and then the Parliament forces him to break his...
Yes, but this is what I'm asking you. Do you really think he was unaware of that possibility when he promised you it couldn't happen?
You're right. He probably should be aware of that possibility happening.
So you're going for incompetence rather than dishonesty?
I'm going for you make a commitment and you aware that there's a possibility something might change. So you can't.
And when he said no British Prime Minister could countenance any form of customs border in the Irish Sea, was that incompetence or dishonesty?
That was dishonesty, I'll say.
Okay, so why are you upset? Why are you upset at me calling him a liar then?
Because I don't think he was a liar in terms of that one key thing of I'll get us out by the end of the 31st.
No, they couldn't countenance a customs border in the Irish Sea. No British Prime Minister, and then as British Prime Minister, he does it. So there is no other word for it.
May I ask a question? Would you expect everybody in public life to turn around and say, I'm going to try and do this because I can't promise I can do it until I actually do it?
Just the really big... Yes, I would. I'd say, I will try to do this.
Yeah.
Of course I would expect everybody in public life, like Jeremy Hunt did. Good God, you've boxed me into a corner where I'm defending Jeremy. I will try my best to get us out by October the 31st because he's treating voters with a modicum of respect. He's not saying, I will be able to deliver the impossible. I would love to do it, but I cannot guarantee that I will be able to. Therefore, I will do my best.
Yeah.
And what he actually said at the time was we may need a few more days. We may need a small delay just to finesse it, to, dot the I's and cross the T's. Yeah. Johnson did the polar opposite. He stood up and said, I will definitely do it. Don't take this the wrong way. Did you fall for it?
Pardon me?
Did you fall for it?
I voted for it originally, but I'd change my mind if there was another referendum.
No, but did you fall for the idea that he would be able to do it? Because a lot of people did.
I thought he would.
Yeah, okay.
I thought he would.
Well, then, I mean, that's why it's effective, you see. Poor old Jeremy Hunt standing there telling boring truths. Boris Johnson telling exciting fibs. Who are you going to vote for? The ghost train or the speak your weight machine?
People from Bolton park their car in the garage, and they call me Farage. And people from Oxfordshire generally call me Farage. Like
what do you...
Oh, poor Simon. 10:49 is the time you're listening to James O'Brien on at LBC, where we are sort of perhaps being a little bit too light-hearted in our search for things Boris Johnson has said that have come true. We've allowed this notion of him securing a deal. The problem with that, of course, is he secured a deal but broke another promise, as he ostensibly kept that one. The promise, of course, not to have any form of customs border in the Irish Sea, which is exactly what he agreed to, something the European Union offered Theresa May in 2017, but she turned down. But it doesn't matter, does it, if you think about it? Because what we've demonstrated today, and I'm not going to lie to you, I'm not completely flipping saintly. I do derive some pleasure from hearing slightly pompous people make complete fools of themselves on the radio. I don't enjoy it so much when you can almost hear the stress of having been conned. It's the people who are so determined not to admit that they've been conned that they end up being, let's say, eccentric, shall we, or some such. But the problem, of course, is what it says about the broader political landscape. You are not going to get a climb down here, not on the emotional stuff. You get a climb down on the stuff that's actually measurable, the promise not to have any form of customs border in the Irish Sea. He'll climb down from that, but he's never going to climb down from the emotion. So I get it done has become the latest dangerous catchphrase. But what does it say about our country now? I mean, how worried are you? So if I say, how worried are you that we're going down a Donald Trump route, then people who are, I don't know what words to use. Should we say racist? I don't know. I mean, who could possibly be happy about going down a route that has seen objective truth subverted? I mean, leaving aside some of the most horrible side effects of Donald Trump's regime, like the caging of babies and the splitting up of families, the betrayal of the Kurds, the facilitation and resurrection of ISIS, all done by him quite deliberately. The murder, of course, of an American journalist of Saudi extraction by the Saudis. in Turkey, secure in the knowledge that Donald Trump won't do anything to punish them, because it's increasingly hard to resist the conclusion that he won't do anything without Vladimir Putin's permission. So we're never going to be quite that bad. But in the context of he says, perhaps naively, but in the context of the relationship between government and media, this is really quite scary, you know? I first wrote about this, I think, in March of 2018. If you don't find a way to call out dishonesty and untruths, they are only going to get worse. And here we are now, somehow contemplating a Prime Minister who has unlawfully suspended Parliament, misled the Queen, lied about when we'd leave the European Union, lied about when... OK, let's correct that. Been shown to have been horribly wrong about leaving the European Union, been shown to be horribly wrong about requesting a delay from the European Union, didn't want an election but does want an election, needed a Queen's speech to get through in order to pursue a really important legislative programme, but then got the Queen's speech through and abandoned the legislative programme and threatened to go on strike. This is, when you assemble it all, probably not a morning on which we should have all been giggling about the failure of any callers to pinpoint any promises that Boris Johnson has successfully and incontrovertibly kept. This is really serious, right? Why are we talking as a nation, let alone a media, about anything other than the catalogue of calumnies perpetrated upon this nation by a Prime Minister who's not even been in the job for 100 days yet? And quick cursory glance at the front pages, printed today by his sponsors, whether it's people who've paid him millions of pounds, like the Barclay brothers who own the Ritz Hotel, or whether it is simply people that have seen him as a vessel to achieve their own ends, like Rupert Murdoch, who famously observed that Downing Street, when he tells them to jump, they jump, but no one pays the blindest bit of attention to him in Brussels. There's an interview with Anthony Hilton, who was city editor of the London Evening Standard from many moons ago. Daily Mail have an editor that recognises the absurdity of leaving the European Union, but is essentially held hostage by an ageing readership that fell for the nonsense of his predecessor. And here we are. I think he could win an election quite easily, partly because Corbyn's such an unattractive candidate, but, you know, that's only part of the problem. The real part of the problem is that we have stopped caring about lies. We've stopped caring. How can we be contemplating any conversation about British politics at the moment that isn't exclusively devoted to Boris Johnson's record? And we haven't even mentioned the technology lessons and the woman who received oodles of public money in circumstances that really need to be investigated. We haven't even mentioned the law-breaking undertaken by Vote Leave when Boris Johnson was in charge of it. This is really important stuff. And I think those of us who feel that, OK, well, we'll just get through this and we'll get over that and then things will get back to normal, probably beginning to question that conviction. Can you think of any point in British political history that stands comparison with this Prime Minister? He's unelected. He's brought a delusional bureaucrat into the very heart of Downing Street. He's made as a laughing stock on the international stage. Oh, he didn't sign the letter. And you hear people like Dave. Dave, you've got to give him credit. He's got the guts to stand up and sort of admit that he's fallen for it. An awful lot of people know that it's nonsense. They're just going along with it, like Republican senators go along with Donald Trump. And here we are, contemplating, in many ways, the collapse of the flawed but functional framework of British parliamentary democracy. 10:55. The angle I'd probably go in on, and I'm like you, I mean, there's so much buzzing around now that it's hard to know what to pick on, and I think that's part of the point as well. Remember, when everything is a crisis, nothing is a crisis. I think the bit I'd go in on is the Queen's speech. It's only moments ago he was adamant that he had to prorogue Parliament in order to properly conduct and respond to the Queen's speech. The Queen's speech passed yesterday, and today he's talking about going on strike. How does that work? When did the Queen's speech cease to be important? If you're a Boris Johnson fan and you were cheering him along last week when he was talking about how important it was to get a Queen's speech before the House, well, it passed yesterday, and they're pretending it never happened. So explain that to me. Gary's in Maida Vale. Gary, what have you got?
Well, I think that what he... Oh, morning, James.
Hello, Gary.
I think what he's actually managed to do is very successfully convince people that black is white.
Yes.
And then not realise that they didn't realise that it was black or white. Like an alchemist, he says things knowing that it doesn't matter if it's true, because he's got this gold dust sprinkler that will change it. I mean, you know, the ERG categorically turned down May's deal because of Ireland. And he's managed to go in there, have a glass of wine, and now that's not at all important to them.
Well, because the alternative is to recognise reality.
What they said at the time. What they really wanted was a Boris Johnson, you know, rock star in Parliament, and didn't care about the consequence. And the danger, and I agree with you 100%, and I am a Tory voter, I have to say, I'm so embarrassed about the situation, because you've got all those people with high moral fibre saying, oh, we're Tories, we're this, we're that, and never voted him in just to get into power. And I think that the state that we're at in this country is very, I mean, I agree with you, is very, very scary.
Well, I'd like to be unscared. I'm more than happy to take calls from people who can tell us all to calm down a bit. But you've got Mark Pudding Francois on the telly last night, whining about Parliament stopping the UK leaving the EU. And it's not like it was 30 years ago that he voted 3 times to stop the UK leaving the EU. The lunatics have taken over the asylum.
Well, absolutely. And the thing is, ironically, I voted for Brexit. Okay.
Fair enough.
And I have been trying to ring you, but I haven't really got round to it. But the reason I wanted to tell you what I know,
Carry on.
It's not really the subject for today, but the reason I voted for Brexit was I was given a choice. Do you want it in or out? And I thought to myself, for 40 years, all I hear about is we want to be on the outside of this, we don't want the euro, we don't want this. And I never went into the detail, and I'm embarrassed about it.
No, don't be.
Of what the impact is.
Yes.
3 years on, it is obvious that the middle ground in this country must realise they underestimated the issue. It doesn't matter whether they got it right or wrong, they underestimated. And that void that's opened up, this gap between one side and the other, is ideal for a salesman like Boris Johnson, who can go in and sprinkle gold dust everywhere, and people go, well, I don't know what I want, but he seems to know, and let's follow him, and he's very positive.
Very astute.
And lots of people, and that's what he's achieved.
Yeah.
So when you say, has he any of his promises? Obviously not. But what he's achieved is he's converted hope into people that were desperate. And that, whether he should or he shouldn't, is why I think if there is an election, I agree with you, he's got every chance of winning, because people look at him and think he's obviously what he is, but I believe in him.
Yeah, well, you've heard it on the radio today. You've heard, Dave in South Ockenden absolutely falling to pieces, and then Simon in Kentish Town having some sort of, I don't quite know how to describe it live on the radio. So what advice can you give them as a Leave voter? Because presume that they're capable of changing their mind, and of course not everybody is.
I think, unfortunately, when you get to this state, someone, unless you get a competing force to Johnson, they're just going to have to learn by that error. I don't think there's any way you can change it. And I know that's very depressing, but I just think that people deep down know where they're at mentally, but they can't do it. Their only key to the door is him at the moment. That's the problem.
The only thing that lets them cling to the notion that they didn't make a terrible mistake back in 2016, which is what makes the conduct of people like Sajid Javid, who, where's this article here? Here you go. The only thing leaving the EU guarantees is a lost decade for British business. I haven't heard Sajid Javid explain his change of heart while he was doing the rounds to all the studios this morning. I presume he was asked about it. Gary, better late than never. I'm glad you got through. I'm sorry we didn't have longer, but the news waits, well, almost for no man.